Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of the AQA Poetry Anthology Exploration brought to you by TGS English. Today's poem is called Tissue and is written by a fantastic poet called Imtiaz Dharker. It is a wonderfully explorative poem about what it means to be human, what it means to build a society, whether it should last or not, and it is a really unique poem within this anthology collection that challenges a lot of the ways we think about time, legacy, humanity. So as always, you will hopefully gain an understanding of this poem through the video. It will be great if you can highlight and annotate along as we go and produce a great set of revision notes. Before we read the poem, I want you to consider the qualities of tissue paper. Think about its weight, its strength, its ability to let light through, its ability to be moulded into different shapes, and any other qualities you think it possesses. I want you to think about how tissue has the ability to be both fragile and strong. You can rip it in half, but you can also write on it and preserve words, ideas, and stories that will last a lifetime. You can hold it up to the light, it can shine through it, you can mould it into different shapes. But it can also contain receipts, bills, words that hurt. Think about your ideas, have a reflection. So let's read through the poem first and think about how it explores paper, tissue, and the ideas that I mentioned at the start of this video. Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching, the kind you find in well-used books. The back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died where and how, on which sepia date. Pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. If buildings were paper, I might feel their drift. See how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift in the direction of the wind. Maps too, the sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. Find slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold and what was paid by credit card. Might fly our lives like paper kites. An architect could use all this. Place layer over layer, luminous script over numbers over line, and never wish to build again with brick or block, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths, through the shapes that pride can make. Find a way to trace a grand design with living tissue. Raise a structure never meant to last. Of paper, smoothed and stroked, and thinned to be transparent. Turned into your skin. This poem has a lot of complex ideas and images and can come across as intimidating, but it is one of my personal favourites. It is really apt for the society that we're living in today, and it really makes us question what we value. So let's explore it further. What is this poem about? Dharker considers objects that we, as humans, value, and she compares them with each other. She thinks about religious books, about maps, receipts, as well as concrete man-made objects like buildings. She uses the poem to make us re-evaluate the things that we value. She's encouraging us to be less selfish and proud. Think about Ozymandias here. And instead, she wants us to appreciate the past, live in the present, and let other people create their own societies in the future. On the left, you can see a tweet that Dharker herself tweeted in reply to a student asking about her poem. And she says, "Follow 3 sets of images. Firstly, fragile tissue and human skin set against the second of rigid social structures, for example, social, religious, and national, that can cause conflict. And 3, light that breaks through." The poem explores how we might avoid conflict by valuing things that tell the real story of our lives. And in that final sentence there, I think it encapsulates what this poem is really about. She wants us to think about what brings us true value, for example, compassion, respecting the teachings of other people, ourselves, building society for the people around us, and not causing conflict through selfishness, through greed, through pride, by building cities, monoliths, statues that preserve us. We're not meant to last, is her point. So now what I would like you to do is to read through the poem a second time, bearing these ideas in mind, and start to think about those individual images of tissue, of concrete objects, and which things you think we should value and which we should avoid. So we're going to explore this poem and we're going to look at a few quotations in particular. Feel free to explore the rest of the poem independently or with your teacher and classmates. But here are some particularly poignant moments that I wanted to draw your attention to. So the first is from the very opening of the poem, where Dharker says, "Paper that lets the light shine through. This is what could alter things." And so it's interesting that the poem begins by introducing 2 key images, paper and light. Think about the fragility that Dharker referenced in her tweet. So she uses the connotations of these objects to challenge her readers and to challenge our values. So let's think about paper first, the ability for it to be moulded, but also destroyed, and also, as I said earlier, to record information and data that is kept for years and years and years. It's really interesting to think about that, this idea of permanence versus instant destruction, and both of those are relevant to paper. When you combine that with the image of light, Dharker considers its ability to let hope and optimism break through it. We often talk about light in poetry, in literature, as being representative of hope, and it's no different here. This is her way of challenging rigid structures that can cause conflict. That light breaking through is Dharker's hope for a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at what we value in life. So she suggests at the start that it is what could alter things. So we're introduced from the very beginning, and if you say in your essays that it is from the very beginning, that is a structural element of analysis which boosts the quality and layers of analysis there for you. So from the beginning, she introduces us to the concept of change, and that is a key purpose of her poem. She's inviting readers to adapt, to alter their perspectives and values. So you could argue that this poem is there to teach us, to really send a message to the readers that will make them think differently after they have read it. So paper and light are used as extended metaphors throughout the poem to explore societal values through the paper and lots of different types of paper, and encourage people to be open to change, which is that repeated idea of the light breaking through. That's a really important point, and you can apply that to any other references to paper and light in this poem and explore what that paper is representing as part of society. Is it causing conflict or not? The second part of the poem I want to draw your attention to is also looking at another example of paper, this time a map. Maps, being made from paper, can be destroyed, ripped in half, set alight, put in books. Despite the simplicity of this material, they are extremely complex and very powerful, with the potential to cause lots of conflict. Wars have been fought over borders for years, for centuries, and they still are. She says, maps too. The sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. She is again here considering the light shining through these maps to suggest that there is hope and we can change. We can use these maps, we can have rail tracks, but we should not be ruled by them. We should be open to alterations. She's using here an asyndetic list of the things that we see on maps, and it's interesting again from a structural perspective to note that she alternates between man-made and natural things. This enables her to subtly reflect the arrogance of mankind and the conflict that they can inflict through invading nature. The word marks possibly highlights mankind's wish to make a permanent mark on the world. So instead of allowing our maps to be dictated by nature's borders, we have put our own. And that's what Dharker is looking at here. Despite the simplicity of this piece of paper, mankind has fought, has negotiated, has taken over to have their borderlines on the maps. So she's looking at the simplicity of paper objects against the serious power they hold. She's making us question this power, and it is later reinforced through the image of a paper kite ruling over us, thinking about how we can allow something as light as a receipt to rule us with the money that we owe, the debts that we have, even perhaps the consumerism within our society. Later on in the poem, she says she instructs, but let the daylight break through capitals and monoliths, through the shapes that pride can make. And as we get into the second half of the poem here, she is instructing her reader. She uses an imperative, a command verb, to instruct her readers to bring in the light. Now remember, light represents hope and change. So she wants us, her readers, the society that she is living in, this is a modern poem, to be open to change and not just focus on our own selfish desires as mankind who wish to leave a legacy. When we think about the capitals and monoliths, these symbolise power. Capital cities are associated with governmental and financial power. If you think about London, we've got financial districts booming in capital cities. We've got the House of Parliament in London. Monoliths refer to monuments, so statues made to remember a key figure. So she's taking issue with these forms of power, with these concrete forms of power and the legacies they leave behind for good or for bad. And she talks about the shapes that pride can make. And I think this is a really interesting image here. And she's looking at mankind's pride, our desire to leave a legacy behind through the buildings and monuments we create. If you think about the Houses of Parliament, they're beautiful buildings. They're there to symbolise power, to symbolise the government. We instantly think about power, about governmental decisions when we look at those buildings. A statue is raised to commemorate a person of key, powerful influence. But Dharker wants to break through those. She wants us to accept the fragility of humanity. Compare a capital city, compare a statue to a piece of paper. They are extremely different in their physical qualities. This particular part of the poem reminds us of Ozymandias, a ruler who was more interested in leaving a mark of his power than caring for the people of his society. So Dharker, like Shelley, wants to reflect on this human desire and she wants to challenge it. And again, that's at the heart of this poem. So if you had a question, for example, on the presentation of power, you could compare it to Ozymandias and you could think about the selfishness of the individual or of the people at the top of that power hierarchy. And these poets desire to challenge that, to think about society as a whole. and that it's okay that we won't last forever. So towards the end of the poem, she ends with this. She talks about a living tissue, razor structure never meant to last, of paper smoothed and stroked, and thinned to be transparent, turned into your skin. This is where Dharker is building up to her final thoughts. She introduces for the first time, in the last line, a direct address to the reader. It is now our responsibility. She wants us to consider our tissue, the tissue that we're made of, our skin, our very being, and of course, our mortality, the fact that we live and we die. We should live in the present. We should live in an honest and transparent way, rather than build bricks or walls to divide us. Think about the images of care here. She talks about paper smoothed and stroked. That recalls the images from earlier in the poem when she talks about the holy books. She wants us to respect the past. She wants us to record our experiences. But we shouldn't make it for selfish reasons. I love this idea of it being thinned to be transparent. We are being open with each other. We are being honest. We are not creating barriers or borderlines, if you think back to the image of the map, to separate us, to divide us, to cause conflict. She wants to envisage a society where people care for each other, where people are living tissue. They are living. And so with that final image turned into your skin, the paper, the tissue that she is now talking about is us. So when we think about how this poem sits in with the rest of the anthology, we have a few options here. So I've chosen 3 key ideas of the poem to begin with, and you can obviously discuss the rest with your classmates. The first is power of mankind. So you can look at Ozymandias and London for that as well. Both Shelley and Blake look at the consequences of power on the rest of society, and like Dharker, are using their poems to challenge that. It's really interesting when you think about how all 3 of them look at the physical aspects of a society and nature, as well as the concept of power. We can also look at power that causes conflict, and Checking Out My History and Kamikaze, both poems which you will study after Tissue, are really good for this exploration, because again it's looking at how power that is embedded within society, values that we are taught to have, can actually cause conflict and cause us to have a mindset that we don't seek to challenge. And again, both poets are forcing their readers to look at that differently. The third one I chose to look at was the idea of challenging governmental and societal power. So the Emigre, London, Exposure, Ozymandias, all of those poems are doing that. They're looking at the systems in place. They're looking at the things that society are forcing their civilians to do. And they're not happy with it. They're questioning it. And they're looking at the corrupt nature of power. And in some cases, the impact on the individual. In some cases, the impact on society as a whole. I really hope you enjoy this poem, and I hope that you read it several times and really think about what Dharker is trying to teach us. Of all the poems in this anthology, I really do think there's a lot that we can take from this poem as people, and there's a lot to reflect on when we think about the way in which society is run and how we as individuals can change that.